Good morning. I am pleased to virtually join you at the McCrary Institute Seminar on Election Security. As Americans, voting is our most sacred right, and I'm so pleased that you are all discussing efforts to ensure our state's election process is secure from potential cyber attacks and safe during COVID-19. I encourage everyone to vote in the upcoming election on November 3rd. And I would be remiss if I also didn't take this opportunity to remind you to fill out your census form if you've not already done so. You can do that on my2020census.gov or by dialing 844-330-2020 or by mail, but the deadline is September 30. Thank you for what you're doing to help our state. May God continue to bless each of you and the great state of Alabama. War Eagle!
Good morning and welcome everyone to our virtual event on election security. Let me start by thanking Governor Ivey for sharing her words of wisdom and her call to vote. I think that today is a significant day. As we know, we're very close to our election, and there are a number of issues we are going to discuss today, and couldn't ask for a better or more informed group to share their wisdom and insights on these issues. We're going to start with Matt Masterson, who I think everyone knows. Matt is the Senior Advisor for all things election security at the Department of Homeland Security, at CISA in particular, and has been driving efforts, and dare I say, if you were to compare where we are today vis-a-vis 2016, it's night and day. So that's thanks in large part to the blood, sweat, and tears of those trying to get us as prepared as we can. So we're going to start with Matt, who previously served as a commissioner at the Election Assistance Commission and served as its chairman in 2017, 2018. And he hails from Ohio, where he also served in the Ohio Secretary of State's office, overseeing a whole host of issues around elections and cyber in particular. But dare I say, there's been a lot discussed on election security. And what we hope today is to bring people up to speed in terms of where we are, where we think things are going well, where we think we may need to double our efforts and redouble our efforts between now and November 3rd. And following Matt's comments, we'll do a quick fireside chat, and then we're going to open it up to an amazing panel of speakers to continue this discussion. So without further ado, Matt, I've never had an unspoken thought, but I want to make sure we save times for your thoughts, and then we jump into a Q&A. So the floor is yours, sir. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Frank. Thank you to Auburn University for your partnership, for the work. Auburn is uniquely positioned with the work we do with Frank and team on the Homeland Security side, and Kathleen, Hale, and the tremendous election administration side to not only host this event, but the support that's been provided to election officials across the country. So very thankful for this event, for your willingness to organize. And I'll try to be brief because honestly, the experts follow next, the state and local election administrators and those supporting them about all the work that's gone on to secure the election. And what I'm going to try to do is tee up some thoughts about where we were, where we are now, as we sit just over 40 days from the election, and then what we could do in those next 40 plus days to both build greater resilience, but really talk to voters and reassure voters about the security, the safety, the resilience of the election process. As anyone on this panel, certainly in this group knows, 4 years ago at this time, evidence of Russian interference was becoming increasingly apparent. Department of Homeland Security, EAC, state and local election officials were trying to come to grips with what was going on while running an election. And it certainly served as a huge wake-up call for the election community, for those of us at the federal level on how to better support state and local election officials, and then the realities of the threats around election systems now vis-a-vis 2016. And since that time, election officials, the private sector, nonprofits, academia have worked night and day to review their systems, to understand where risks lie, and to build greater resilience across the election process. And that much of that work has gone on behind the scenes as election officials have taken resources that have been provided, reviewed their systems, and really assessed where improvements could be made. For CISA, our mission's clear. Our job is to support election officials, their private sector partners, consistent with the Constitution, existing law, and to serve in that assistance role. State and local officials run elections, but we have a deep understanding of cybersecurity, and now, thanks to the partnership with election officials, a much deeper understanding of election systems and the processes that surround them. We've worked hard over the last 4 years to build what we view as a cohesive election security community that includes not just our state and local partners, their private sector vendors, but private sector threat intelligence companies, private sector IT support. Academia has been critical to the work we've done, in nonprofits across the board, conducting research, reviewing systems, sharing information, all to improve the overall security. Currently, CISA works with all 50 states, literally thousands of local jurisdictions, the private sector, and our focus is really on providing information, support, and services, whatever resources we can to help support those state and local officials in order to maintain the security and resilience of the process. And that trust was, I think, hard-earned and is constantly needing to be reaffirmed. State and local officials have pushed us in a way that we've never been pushed before, have demanded more from us on timely information sharing, on penetration testing and cyber hygiene scanning. The trust was built not through words, but through actions and being present with them every day we could to try to support them, whether that's physical security reviews of election offices or on-site incident response. Our job was to be responsive, to understand their needs, and to engage with them. And I think we've done a very successful job of that, working from a trust deficit in 2017, to put it lightly, to really a trusted working environment today. We've done things like establishing the Information Sharing and Analysis Center, the Election Information Sharing and Analysis Center, where we have almost 3,000 local jurisdictions as members, but it's actually larger than that. We know states like Wisconsin take the information that the ISAC produces and tailor it for their locals, 1,800 local officials or more in Wisconsin, and push it out to them broadly. So we know beyond just the membership numbers, that information is cascading down to state and local officials and really helping them manage risk to their elections. We have Albert sensors deployed across all 50 states and several of the territories, and in local offices in many states. For instance, in the state of Florida, they've deployed Albert sensors across all 67 supervisors networks as well. This not only hopefully provides a service to the state and local officials, but it gives us a level and depth of understanding of the types of activity targeting or floating around election infrastructure that we didn't have in 2016. We've increased our visibility exponentially thanks to that partnership, and we're building on that. This summer we announced, working with the ISAC, to pilot and implement endpoint detection and response systems on state and local election networks to, again, build that layered defense and continue to serve the election community in a way that we previously could not. And then working with the private sector, we've been able to do the same type of services, but expand as well through something called a critical product evaluation process, where we conduct vulnerability testing of vendors' products, covering 2/3 of the U.S.'s population, if you look at the types of products and where they're deployed, to test and disclose critical product vulnerabilities and work with the private sector to get those mitigated. And we're proud of that partnership with the private sector and the work we've been able to do. Election officials and their vendors now have access to more information, services, and intelligence than they've had ever before, but we know we've got to continue to push the envelope, that we've got to continue to coordinate with our federal partners, working hard to push as much information out as broadly as possible to help the election community understand the risks to their systems, to understand the steps they could take to mitigate, and prioritizing support to them. Because of the decentralized nature of our elections, voters are able to engage directly with those who run the process. And we think this is a really key aspect to our election system. Arming election officials with the tools they need to protect the process is just not a matter of support to them, but it's our best way to reach voters, to reassure them that they're going to be able to vote and their vote will be counted as cast. That ability to talk to voters about all of the steps that have been taken since 2016 to secure the process is really critical in this timeline as we approach Election Day, so that voters have the information they need from the sources that run elections to reassure them that the process is resilient and that all of us are prepared to ensure that their vote is counted as cast. A really good example of this is the amount of auditability we now have. In 2016, we were around 85% of auditable records for votes cast in the election. In this election, we anticipate over 92% or more of votes cast will have that auditable record. I know Secretary Boockvar could talk about the incredible steps they've taken in Pennsylvania coming up. States across the country have really worked hard to implement auditability, and now we push towards better, more efficient audits so that we can have a transparent process that voters can have trust in. It's my experience that in no other area is the federal government working more closely, collaborating more closely than in election security. It's a top priority for us at CISA. I know the FBI is prioritizing election security, and the intelligence community across the board has been prioritizing to get information out, to support state and local officials in the private sector so that they can talk to their voters and ensure voters that the process is resilient and that they're doing everything they can to secure it. I want to talk just briefly about where we are, and you can't do that without talking about COVID-19 and the impact it's had. And I know the following panel will have some real on-the-ground insights on this. We recognize that this election will look and feel for many voters very different than it has in the past in many jurisdictions because of the impact of COVID. Some states are expanding absentee balloting, others are offering expanded in-person voting or large super sites. Some are doing curbside voting or drive-through voting, all in a way to try to serve voters and offer a safe process. And the reality is for election officials, they're trying to meet voters where they are. They're trying to understand the needs of their voters, the best way to serve them in a safe and secure manner. And for us at CISA, it really comes down to supporting those election officials, helping understand the risk in implementing processes and systems that are secure as they respond to needs of voters. And I know from talking to election officials across the country, this challenge is unique in that it's forcing changes to the process in a way quicker than what they're used to. Usually in elections, change is evolutionary, not revolutionary. We like to pilot, we like to test, we need to reaffirm. And in this case, in response to COVID, election officials have done yeoman's work, really working to understand what they can do, how they can implement it, and how to do that securely. And we're right there alongside them, working with them to try to help them understand, okay, how does this change the systems? How does this change the service providers? How can we manage the security and resilience of the process with the changes that we're having to make? And I can assure you, election officials do not make these changes lightly. They think through every redundancy, every plan to really reassure themselves what steps do we have to take to ensure not just access to the process, but also security and resilience as they work to implement those things. And voters have a role to play in this too. I think that's really critical. For us, working with election officials, we really focused on how to have a prepared, a patient, and a participating voter. By a prepared voter, we mean a voter that understands, am I registered? Is my registration up to date? Today is National Voter Registration Day. What a perfect day for all voters to go out and either register or update their registration to ensure that their information is accurate and up to date. Then work to understand, what are your choices in your jurisdiction? How do you plan to interact with the process, whether that's absentee, voting early in person, voting on election day? Understanding your options and having a plan, including what's on your ballot and what to expect, is a really key resilience measure that voters can bring to the process. Then being patient, understanding there have been changes in many jurisdictions, understanding it may take time to receive your ballot. You have options for how you return your ballot in many places, that election night results may be less complete than what you're used to seeing. None of that means there's a problem in the process. It means election officials are focused on accuracy, not speed, and they're doing everything they can to make sure that you get the service you need while maintaining the security and accuracy of the process. And so having a little patience, understanding how the process is going to look is really critical, and then participating. If you can, serve as a poll worker. If you're healthy, not at risk. I know election officials across the country need more poll workers, but if you can't do that, just getting involved, watching pre-election testing, understanding the options, understanding the steps your election officials have taken really helps build resilience. And in the end, voters are the last line of resilience in the election process. And they're critical to ensuring that any attempts to undermine faith or trust in the process are batted away, because they know their options, they know how their jurisdiction's securing the vote, and they have confidence that their vote will be counted as cast. So in the end, having a 3P voter comes down to pushing voters to those trusted sources of information, those state and local election officials who have the information available for voters to understand what the process looks like, how to participate, and the steps they've taken to secure it and to build a more resilient process. And so if you have questions, again, those who run elections live in your community, they work in your community, engage with them, get your questions answered, and be sure that you're a 3P voter. Finally, just to talk about where we need to go in the next 40 days. We know because of the visibility and the work and reporting we're getting from state and local officials that election systems like IT systems generally are being scanned, are being targeted, are being researched for vulnerabilities. While we have no evidence of direct targeting of election infrastructure by nation states, we know and continue to see reports of scanning, and it's coming straight from state and local officials who are sharing a lot of information with us. We also know and see state and local governments in general being impacted by things like ransomware and vulnerabilities being exploited in order to impact state and local governments generally and having an impact on election offices. Even if the ransomware doesn't directly impact the election office, we see cascading impacts where internet is lost, connectivity to websites is lost. And so having resilience measures in place, preparing and understanding how dependent you are on vendors, other county government, state government is really critical because in this time frame, we know if websites go down, if ransomware is impacting, we got to get out and message and talk to voters about the process still has integrity. Here's what's going on. Here's how we're responding. And so really understanding that there remains activity in and around election systems, in and around state and local government systems, and we all need to be prepared to respond. And so what can we do in the next 40 days? Where's the focus for CISA? First is continuing to push out information to state and local governments to patch. We continue to see vulnerabilities exposed. There was a recent Microsoft vulnerability, a critical vulnerability that we pushed very quickly out to our SLTT partners. Getting that remediated, getting that patched, absolutely critical to managing risk of the process. Reviewing and improving and rehearsing incident response plans. We've done hundreds of exercises with thousands of state and local officials across the country over the last 3 years, taking out those incident response plans right now, taking the time to say what's in here, what has changed since COVID, is there more I need to put in? And then practicing that is something everyone could do right now without touching one system or impacting one part of the process. But it's a level of preparedness, and we continue to exercise with state and local officials to prepare for that. Ensuring that you have your backups, that you've tested your backups, that you're ready to respond in the case of something like ransomware is still something that's in play right now within this 40 plus day window, and a step that everyone can take. And then finally, reporting anything and everything, getting information into the ISAC, getting information into CISA gives us that broad visibility that we're then able to turn around and push information back out to the community. The amount of sharing going on from the election community has been robust. We're incredibly thankful to the trust that the officials have had with us, but it's more important than ever in this time frame to get that information in so that we can respond. Finally, just a quick comment about the posture we'll be in heading into Election Day. We're currently within the 45-day window, which means government speak, we're in an enhanced readiness posture. It means that every day we have a cadence with our federal partners. Is there anything we need to be sharing, anything we need to be pushing? We're checking in regularly with the ISAC on reporting and doing regular unclassified threat briefings to the election officials so that they have everything they need to manage risk to their systems. As we approach Election Day, we'll implement two things. One is an operations center that'll be largely virtual up until Election Day with our federal partners, with social media companies, with election system providers and election officials. This operations center is to ensure timely sharing of information across all of those channels and to make sure we have full visibility on what's going out there so we can spot trends or issues and quickly push it out. On Election Day, we'll have that operations center both in person and virtually, but also expand to open up what we call our cyber situational awareness room, where literally thousands of state and local officials are together in a virtual chat room sharing information in real time. And the real key on that is the ability to sort fact from fiction on the ground quickly. As we get reports in from the field, as we get reports in from our field staff, media, and others, we're able to go directly to the sources, the state and local officials, and ask, is this an issue that's going on? Or is it just something that we see in every election? Voting systems not plugged in, miscalibrations, polling places not opening, e-poll books needing to be rebooted. That happens in every election, but understanding something more systemic is going to be really critical so we can track down fact from fiction and get information out to the public. And then finally, I want to talk on the role that universities and the nonprofit sector have played in the work we've done. I mentioned at the beginning Auburn's unique positioning in this space with both the work we do on the Homeland Security side and the incredible work that Dr. Hale and the elections team at Auburn do. We have benefited from the relationships with universities and nonprofits to help us share information, to help us boil down security practices, and for those folks to serve as a validator for much of the good work that state and local officials are doing. And I will say Dr. Hale's work allowing us to do trainings with election officials, involving us in panels and speaking directly to the community has been really critical to building this election security community. And I'm really thankful to the relationship we've been able to build with Auburn and others across academia in order to do this, particularly some of the work we've been able to do on the disinformation side with folks like the Stanford Internet Research Institute and others has been really critical to our ability to manage risk and work together. So finally, just a message and a plea. As voters, as folks listening on this call, you have an important role to play. I talked about the 3P voter, being prepared, being patient, and participating, and thinking about your role in the process. Before you share election information, is it coming from one of those trusted sources? As you engage with your family and friends, making sure they're a 3P voter and turning to those trusted sources of information, this is going to be our best resilience measures to any attempts to undermine confidence, which we know our adversaries are seeking to do. And so I'm so thankful to Auburn for hosting this, to the state and local officials we work so closely with, their private sector partners. We're in it now. CIS is in it with you, and we stand ready to support in any way we can. And Frank, thanks for the time this morning to open this up.
Hey, Matt, thank you. Thanks for an amazing and concise framing of the challenges.
I've never been accused of being concise.
You covered a lot of terrain in a short amount of time, so thank you for that. And I think you did it exceedingly well and cogently, and also recognizing the good work of Dr. Hale. I appreciate that very much because we're very proud of all that she's doing here at Auburn. So I'm excited about our partnership there, just as I am with CISA and others. And also thank you for the PSA on National Voter Registration Day. You couldn't ask for a better day to be speaking to these issues because ultimately individuals have a responsibility in all this. It is a right in terms of our democratic process, but it comes with some responsibility. So thank you for that. I'm going to start with sort of the threat picture, just so we can get a sense of that landscape. And recently, Microsoft came out with a report that was in large part consistent with what the intelligence community had been publicly reporting in terms of the intentions and capabilities of our adversaries, notably Russia, but also China and Iran. And I'd be curious, what insights, if any, was this all news that you were aware of, or and find it helpful that Microsoft was putting out their report? And how should we take that? I mean, if you really rack and stack the threat, I think we're talking about countering foreign influence probably at the top of the list, whether misinformation, disinformation campaigns. Then you've got the actual hardcore zeros and ones cyber-related issues. I mean, let's be serious. Now we're dealing with voting in the midst of a pandemic. So that's a lot that we're dealing with here. But how would you rack and stack it? And talk to me about the Microsoft report and how it coincides and aligns with the intelligence reporting.
Yeah, appreciate the question. And Microsoft has been a tremendous partner for us, I know for election officials too, and has really embraced their role in the election community, recognizing a lot of Microsoft support comes and supports state and local governments and the work they do. And so Microsoft did a great job pushing out those reports. We pushed them broadly to the election community. And as you said, we view this in the three buckets that really came out from 2016 reports like the CISI report and otherwise, right? There's the misinformation, disinformation, there's the targeting of election infrastructure, and then campaigns, right? And both the sort of activity in and around campaigns. The Microsoft report revealed activity from all three of those actors around campaign infrastructure. It was incredibly insightful into sort of what each one of those actors' tactics and techniques towards that campaign infrastructure and nonprofits were. And for us from CISO, right, we're viewing this through a risk lens rather than a threat lens. We rely on our IC partners to speak to us about threat. But for us, it really helped us take that understanding of what Microsoft was reporting in and around that infrastructure and push it to the community to say, okay, password spraying. Okay, what steps can you take? Multi-factor authentication, something we've been working really hard with state and local officials on. Stronger passwords, network segmentation, all critical things around those TTPs that we're seeing in that Microsoft report. Again, not targeted election infrastructure, but if it were to turn and pivot that way, how can we be prepared now to prevent the effectiveness of a campaign like that, right? And so we have pushed that information out. We had Microsoft provide a threat briefing to election officials last week on it. Appreciate that, as well as our federal partners talking about it, so we can understand and be prepared that if our adversaries, or really if cyber criminals or others choose to mirror that type of TTP, we're prepared and can detect it. And either prevent it or respond if it's successful, right? And so from our perspective, as we look, we continue to see spear phishing and social engineering as the most likely avenue to target state and local officials. We see success on that on the cyber criminal side across SLTT, but then also preparedness in and around voter registration data and the critical systems. And so that kind of reporting, that kind of transparency from Microsoft really helps us talk directly to state and local officials about, okay, here's what we're seeing on this side. Let's assume it comes our way. How can we be prepared for that?
Awesome, thank you. And jumping into sort of the a lot has been done, and I mean this genuinely. CISA deserves a lot of credit for the work in terms of syncing up with our state and local, which is always going to be where the rubber hits the road and where action is most important. So aside from the amazing work you've done now, I hate to say it, but we're only as strong as the weakest link. So I'd be curious, is there any individual or particular thing that keeps you up at night right now, recognizing we're a 42-day sprint, but what's the one thing that keeps you up at night? And not naming names, please. We don't want to put a target on anything, but is there something in particular that is keeping you up? And I think that even if there is, the relationships that you have built have ameliorated some of that risk, I would argue, because there's a belly button now. People know where to call, who to call, and how to call. But I'd be curious what your thoughts are on that, Matt.
Yeah. Besides late night phone calls from Chris Krebs, which do keep me up at night, literally. For me, one is that it's the election community that has put in all the work, right? I hope we've supported. I think we've done a good job, but they're the ones that have had to implement these changes to really take a look at their systems, and they've worked their tails off to do that. And so for me, what keeps me up at night is working with our interagency partners. What more can we share? What more can we push out? Is there something from the private sector we should be pulling in order to push it out so that they have all the information they need? Again, not just to manage the risks of their systems, that's right, and we want them to have all of that, but then to talk to their voters about what's going on and how they're doing it. Because as you recognized, in an environment where we know our adversaries are trying to undermine trust in the process, that information isn't just power to protect the systems, it's power to build trust with voters so that they have confidence and participate. And so what keeps me up at night is there's something we're not seeing, is there's something we're not tracking or pushing that we should be, so that we can get it to the state and local partners, the private sector, to help them engage and talk to their voters, both in the lead up to the election and afterwards, because we know there's going to be attempts to undermine confidence in the process, and any piece of information can really empower election officials to talk to their voters.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. And I'm glad you recognize that the adversary doesn't even have to be successful. It is about trust and confidence, whether it's voter confidence or whether it's questioning the integrity of the electoral system and the process and everything else. So I think that gets to your 3 Ps that individuals do have a responsibility in this fight as well. So thank you for recognizing that. I want to make sure we have time for the,
real quick,
please.
Sorry, just real quick on that. What we're seeing from election officials, I mean, Boulder County just released a community briefing out to their community to talk about the resilience measures and security they put out. Counties and states are opening up the counting process through things like Facebook Live and otherwise. Pre-election testing is public in almost every state. There are opportunities to really open up the process that election officials, but any election official, I'm sure David Stafford can talk about this on the panel, no one shows up to pre-election testing, right? It's like watching paint dry, but it's a critical public transparency mechanism to not just show that we're ready for the election, but that a lot of thought, time, and planning has gone into securing the process, right? And so anything we can do to make this a community event to help people understand is really critical.
Awesome. And before turning it over to the panel, one last question, and that is sort of planning around the pandemic and COVID-19 and what we're doing to safeguard not only the voters, but also poll workers, volunteers, and the many women and men charged with this mission. Can you shed some light on some of the steps that CISA is suggesting and advocating? And then, of course, we'll hear more from two states that I think a lot of people are paying attention to, Pennsylvania and Florida. But I'd be curious what your thoughts are there, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be brief. But CISA, when COVID really began to take full force, we worked with our partners at the Election Assistance Commission, our partners on our Government Coordinating Council and Sector Coordinating Councils to create what we called the swim lane documents. So there's 14 documents that the GCC and SEC produced jointly around managing elections and managing risk during COVID. And they focus on everything from mail ballot distribution to mail ballot return to ballot drop boxes to in-person vote centers to securing your staff in a time of COVID, all with a focus on providing tangible steps to election officials to meet them where they are. So if a state's looking at expanding early voting, there are tangible checklists and steps in those documents to help them do that in a COVID environment. We worked closely with the CDC, USPS as well, to try to get some information out, because there is a ton of information flying at election officials right now from all different directions. And we really just wanted to boil down some steps. Okay, right now I'm looking at expanding absentee voting. Where am I in that process? What steps can I take to secure? And I'm thankful to the community for working with us on those, the EAC working with us on those. I think they're really useful to really help election officials get their minds around, okay, what steps tangibly can I take and bust through some of that information overload.
Awesome, Matt. And before I turn it over to Chris for his moderating, let me just remind all our viewers here, questions we're going to take at the end, and Matt will be part of the Q&A at the end of the session. But please send your questions in via social media, those that are watching on Facebook Live or on YouTube or I believe it's Periscope on Twitter. Please just send your questions in that way, and we'll make sure we get to all of those. And Matt, you're captive here, so we'll keep you around for a while. And let me turn it over to one of our esteemed senior fellows, Chris Comiskey, to moderate the amazing phase 2. So Chris, over to you.
Great, thank you, Frank, and thank you, Matt, for your leadership at the federal level. As Frank indicated, much of this work is really being done on the ground in the states, and we've got an exemplary panel today to talk about what does election security look like in the time of COVID. And so I'm going to go ahead and introduce each of the panelists, and then we'll go to each one for an opening a series of thoughts, and then we'll go to some questions and back to the full group. So thank you very much for taking the time to join us today for this important issue. Our first panelist is Kathy Boockvar. Kathy is the Secretary of State for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Ms. Boockvar has served as Commonwealth Secretary since January of 2019. The Secretary is an attorney with an extensive background in public interest law, policy, and election administration. For many years, the Secretary, prior to becoming the Secretary, worked as a poll worker and really saw firsthand on the front lines and gained extensive knowledge and experience of state and local election law. She's worked as a private practice attorney and is currently serving as the Election Committee co-chair for the National Association of Secretaries of State, NAS, and works as a co-chair with her colleagues across the country on best practices in providing more secure and accessible elections. Welcome, Secretary. Our second panelist is David Stafford. David is the county supervisor in Escambia County in Florida since 2004. The supervisor is a past president of the Florida State Association of Supervisors and the current legislative chair of the National Association of Election Officials. Since the designation of elections as part of the nation's critical infrastructure in 2017, the supervisor has served on the government's coordinating council as one of 9 local elected officials, serving as on the executive committee, and has authored many of the communications and information sharing protocols for the election sector. Thank you. Welcome. Our next panelist is Dr. Kathleen Hale. Dr. Hale is the Director of the Elections Administration at Auburn University at the McCrary Institute, as well as a fellow. Dr. Hale is a professor of political science at Auburn and serves as the director of the University Faculty Election Security and National Professional Certification Program. Her most recent book, How We Vote, Innovations in American Elections, examines conditions that foster and constrain innovation in the election administration environment. Welcome, Dr. Hale. And lastly, our panelist joining us today from the MITRE Corporation is Emily Frye. Emily is the Director of Cyber Integration at MITRE and is also a senior fellow with the Institute. She has extensive cyber integration background, not only with MITRE, but across national and federal areas of interest, including serving as the co-director of the Election Integrity Initiative, SQUINT, at MITRE. Since joining MITRE, she has helped define many of the major issues that face us on the cyber front in infrastructure protection and in election security. So as you can see, we've assembled an incredibly talented group of panelists today. I want to turn it over to Secretary Boockvar for some opening thoughts. Please.
Thank you so much to Auburn and to all of you for being part of this today. And thank you to Matt Masterson, as always, a wealth of information. And we across the country are lucky to have you in this role. So thank you for all that you at CISA are doing. One of the things, it's nice to be talking about election security, which was something that we were, sort of 24/7 talking about last year and the year before. And COVID-19 has, to some degree, actually displaced some of these critical conversations. And it's one of the areas that I'm most proud about, the work that we've done in Pennsylvania, and the advances not only in sort of strategy and technology and preparations, but also in collaborations, as Matt Masterson was talking about earlier. Before I was secretary, I also served as senior advisor to the governor on election modernization. And one of my roles was overseeing the development of our election security in Pennsylvania as well. And it is just remarkable how much has changed. I joined the administration in March of 2018, and it is truly remarkable how much has changed just in the last 2.5 years, not only in Pennsylvania, but across the country. It's really, really a different place than it was 2.5 years ago. And I think a lot of that, so one of the things that surprises me sometimes is when people take a myopic look at what election security means, which it makes no sense in this or any other circumstances. You think about national security and national defense, you could have the strongest Navy in the world, but if you aren't also securing your air and your land, you're going to be nowhere. It's key to have, the Air Force and Navy and Marines and Army all be fortified as much as possible. And, that's the same approach that we've taken to election security. So, for example, everything from in 2018, we at the Department of State required all 67 counties to upgrade their voting systems to new voting systems meeting the highest standards of both security and accessibility. And we actually created new standards in Pennsylvania that were more stringent than what was required by the federal government, by the EAC, because we believed so strongly in the need to take it to the next level. And every single one of the systems certified in Pennsylvania also has a voter verifiable paper trail. And all 67 counties did that. They rolled them out in 2019 and 2020. And as Matt Masterson also referred to, one of the things that we felt so strongly about as we fortified that section of our election security was the paper is great, but it doesn't mean anything unless you're looking at it. And so we created a work group, a statewide post-election audit work group, involved counties, involved Department of State, involved national experts on audits. And we started piloting risk limiting audits. In 2019, we did several county ones. And then this summer, we actually piloted our first statewide risk limiting audit. Happy to say that it confirmed the results of the presidential primaries on both the Republican and Democratic side. So that's always good news with your first statewide audit. And I look forward to doing another pilot statewide after the November election as well. But again, it's not just enough to have election security on the voting systems, right? As you know, we've taken efforts to make sure that every part of our systems are strengthened. So from voter registration system to ongoing vulnerability and cyber hygiene assessments. We were actually the first state in the country, I believe, to invite Department of Homeland Security in to do a vulnerability assessment of Pennsylvania's systems, and we've continued that since then as well. We do, disaster recovery exercises, coup planning, tabletop exercises, phishing exercises. We've been doing phishing exercises across the Commonwealth, for years and years, but we stepped it up at the Department of State. We actually do monthly exercises now with follow-up to any employees who need follow-up. We also, one of the things that's been great has been the collaborations, as I mentioned, and that's state, federal, and local. And in 2018, we created an interagency work group on election security and preparedness. And it includes Department of State, PEMA, the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency, Pennsylvania State Police, National Guard has been a strong partner, Homeland Security, Office of Information Technology, the Governor's Office, the Inspector General, and we meet regularly to discuss all aspects of election security. And that's been such a critical partnership, because just learning, there's different, for example, tracking of even something like social media and misinformation. We realized, I think in 2018, that the words that, say, for example, Department of State was looking for in tracking in social media to assess where there were risks were different than what Pennsylvania State Police was doing, than what National Guard was tracking. And the more that we're in communication together, the stronger we're going to be. So, so this is continued. I have a meeting, later today with many of these partners. I've got a meeting next week with the FBI, who's become a strong partner as well. And, National Guard has been phenomenal on so many levels. So, and I agree, COVID-19, of course, it's maybe not its own front, but it impacts every front on which we have to operate and strengthen. And it's been a very collaborative effort in Pennsylvania and across the country. I'm proud to be part of the EIS-GCC, the Election Infrastructure Subsector Government Coordinating Council. I've gotten almost to the point where I could say that 5 times fast. The ISACs have been critical partners. And again, this has been such a key part of our strengthening of election security for every voter across the Commonwealth, whether we're in normal times or in the middle of global pandemic. So I know we're sort of short on time, so I think I'll stop there. But I want to thank you again to CISA especially for being a strong partner on all things elections, and to all of you for the work that you're doing to help us secure those elections for every voter across the nation.
Madam Secretary, thank you. And that's a great explanation of what's going on in Pennsylvania. A lot of eyes on the state, certainly as we get closer. So thank you for your comments. Supervisor Stafford, let's go to the county level for some opening thoughts, please.
Sure. Well, thank you very much. And thanks to the opportunity to be on a panel with all these distinguished folks. And I want to echo the comments about my friend Matt Masterson and the tremendous work that he's done since the outset. of this designation in 2017. Works tirelessly. I've seen it, sitting next to him in meetings and talking to him at all hours. So we all owe him a debt of gratitude for the probably years of lost sleep and and stress and whatnot, and being responsible for the security of the elections. So I've been fortunate to have had a seat at the outset. I remember being in a conference room, a hotel ballroom in Washington in early 2017. At the tail end of a election center conference, and a representative from Homeland Security was there, not so subtly telegraphing to the assembled audience that very soon the election subsector would be part of critical infrastructure. And then I think that was on a Friday afternoon, and I think by the time my plane landed back in Florida, the announcement had been made. And at that point, it was really nobody really knew. And I think if you go back and talk to some of the folks on the other side, on the federal side, they didn't really know what that meant either. Certainly, the state and local officials did not know. Have any idea what that designation meant, at least at that time. So I want to begin by sort of reiterating the how far we've come since the elections of 2016, since the designation in 2017. And we are, there is no doubt that we are in a tremendously better situation now today than we were during those elections. Now, unfortunately, the threat has grown along with us, but to try to quantify the work that's been done, it's impossible. So, first of all, it's the relationships that are built, because in reality, the federal government, particularly those on the security side, I don't think really had a grasp of how elections were run, really, when it came down to it. And certainly, I think the folks that run elections did not have a great understanding of the security side. Election officials for years have focused on election security, but mostly that's focused, physical security, securing your ballots, your voting equipment, and then I think in recent years, certainly since 2000, and we've got that scar tissue here in Florida that we've built up over the years. On the security of the voting systems as well, but everything else is kind of what's new, and it came to the fore in 2016. So tremendous tremendous progress just on building those relationships and these two different entities, or multiple different entities, talking to each other and getting to understand each other, and that trust deficit that Matt mentioned earlier. Has really, there's still some tension. I think will always be, and I think that's healthy. But we're in a just the fact that we know who to call if something happens now, and they know who to call. It worked both ways. They didn't, there was a complete misunderstanding, I think, of, okay, well, I'm just going to call the state election official and everything will be taken care of. Well, no, you got to get down to the local level where these things are happening. And then vice versa. If something happens to one of our systems, then we need to know who to talk to, or one of the many people that we need to speak to. The other thing I want to make sure is mentioned is we had a national election in 2018 that was successful by all accounts. We here in Florida, for the first time ever, anywhere in the history of the country, as best I can tell, ran 3 statewide recounts. Okay, in arguably the biggest swing state in the country, and did it successfully. There were some bumps, but overall it was a very successful election cycle in 2018. Obviously, presidential elections are a different animal, but we've made tremendous progress. And so let me talk a little bit about some of the things that have happened here in the state of Florida. And I also want to give credit the state here, particularly the folks at the state level, the Department of State. We were the first state Matt mentioned it earlier, that all 67 counties, we have 67 counties too, Secretary Boockvar, we are all behind Albert sensors, and that happened. That was an initiative that was started by the Secretary of State and done with state funds at that time, because this was before the election security money came down from the feds. Decided it was a priority, got it through the legislature, and now all 67 counties sit behind an Albert sensor in addition to those at the state level. We were also the first state that all 67 counties became members of the EII-SAC. Also, more recently, the governor and the Secretary of State worked with local election officials on the Joint Election Security Initiative that did an assessment, pretty detailed assessment of all 67 counties' posture, and then followed up that's the important part. Followed up not only with their assessment, the results of that, but also with some money to help mitigate some of those changes. We also did worked closely with Department of Homeland Security in a tabletop exercise just specifically for Florida. We had taken part in a national exercise, but we did one in conjunction with our canvassing board workshop, and it was very successful because it was very specific to Florida and how we vote in Florida and some of the nuances that we have here in our state. And the last thing, because I want to make sure everybody has time, is talking about since Dr. Hale is on the panel, is this partnership with academia, and talk about a trust deficit. Again, hearkening back to 2000 and our experiences here in the state of Florida. Now, full disclosure, I was not elected until 2004, so I was not an election administrator at the time. But I can tell you that there was a huge trust deficit between election officials and those in academia, because frankly, they just didn't. Local election officials just simply didn't trust academia and I think there were some good reasons why at that time. So over the years, folks like Dr. Hale and the people at Auburn and through the Election Center, and folks like Nate Persley and Charles Stewart, and I don't want to start naming names, but because I'm going to leave out a bunch of people, but I mean, there's been tremendous work that's done, and it's important work because you have to build that trust relationship. And there's still some folks out there that there's still some work that needs to be done. But academia is a huge critical partner, but they have to work with election officials and not lecture them and talk down to them, because they have to understand the environments in which we work, which are vastly different from even much less state to state, county to county can even be tremendously different. So I want to give, make sure I give credit where credit is due. And again, Dr. Hale and her team and those like her out there are a critical partner in what we do. And so with that, I'll turn it back over and be happy to join in the discussion later.
Well, thank you, Supervisor Stafford, and for all the work you're doing on the ground in Florida. As a former state senator myself in Arizona, I know how important the work is that is being done at the county and local levels in delivering fair and trusted elections. So thank you for the work that you're doing. As we move to our next panelist, Dr. Hale, obviously not only a premier researcher at Auburn, but also a convener of election officials across the country. Dr. Hale, your opening thoughts?
Well, thank you, Chris and Frank, and to the McCrary Institute for asking me to be a part of this discussion. It's an honor to be here with Matt and David, and thank you for all of your very kind words on behalf of myself, but also on behalf of the faculty at Auburn University and the work that they're doing around the country, in particular the work that I've been fortunate enough to do with my colleague Mitchell Brown, who many of you know. I'll use my time this morning to add to the conversation about the work that local election officials are doing and the critical nature of resources and public trust. Local election offices get their resources in a really straightforward way. The bulk of it comes from local general funds from county commissioners. There are some funds that come in from state offices. These are not uniform. They don't cover local costs, and in some cases could actually appear to be downright stingy. Federal funds, particularly in the area of security, both for cybersecurity and for COVID and related to the pandemic, are very, very welcome. Again, let me say, Matt's on the call, Sis is on the call, very, very, very welcome. But these funds are typically targeted to specific purposes, and they're not always easy to finagle into general operating activities. And most of these funds go to state offices. States provide important support and critical infrastructure support for sure. But the local election office is where the voters meet the election process. The local government infrastructure, the polling sites, the vote centers, the drop boxes. This is where elections are real to the voters, and this is where public trust has to be supported. So the point is, we've created an indirect path to provide funds to local offices where this trust can be fostered, and perhaps we haven't provided enough in this area. These general operating funds are the funds that can be used to provide professionalization for staff, to provide training and information sharing, the results of which you have heard evidence of in Kathy's presentation and Matt's and David's, to support the best practices that we know improve election operating performance. And when I say there's not enough money, let me share just one really quick example. In research that I have done with Mitchell Brown, we found that the local election office share of a county budget was 0.5%. 0.5%. Now, this was a sample. Maybe we were a little bit off. Let's say it was 1%. Local election offices have never been flush. That's the point. And they compete for this money alongside every other general function of county government, most of which is much more visible 365. This is not new in any way. The current circumstances are simply highlighting the under-resourced nature of the local system even before the pandemic was on the horizon. And let's be candid, state and local resources are not expected to increase anytime soon. In fact, quite the opposite. And so we're engaged in a really important conversation about what's happening now and about what can be done now and about public policy choices ultimately, right? Some of those will be, maybe they'll be good, maybe they won't, maybe we'll agree, maybe we'll disagree. I'd like to plant the seed that we could focus on better understanding going forward the difference between the public policy choices and the hard choices that are made in local offices about how to implement those decisions, and whether we've given local offices the capacity that they need in order to do what we're asking them to do. There is no question that the efforts of state and local election officials and their federal partners have been heroic over the last few months and over the last year, and maybe thinking about how to set a platform and lay the groundwork for a more stable and improved system would serve us all well. And I'll turn this over now to the other panelists and look forward to questions.
Thank you, Dr. Hale, and for all the work that you're doing to convene and bring together folks around the country. It's really essential to have academia a leader in that thought process, so thank you. Our last panelist is Emily Frye. As I indicated, Emily is with MITRE, which is a federally funded research and development center that provides support not only to agencies like DHS, but is also building tools to help state and local governments with their efforts around election security. Ms. Frye?
Thank you, Chris. MITRE is a little bit different, and we bring a slightly different perspective to the issue of elections. MITRE's job in the world, its place in the world, is to look at what the nation might need and where is the nation already strong, and to figure out in the public interest what could be done potentially to help the nation. After the 2018 elections, a few of my colleagues and I decided it was time to take that step back and pull everyone together that works on elections at MITRE and really think about where is this nation very strong already in elections and defending the integrity of elections, and due in large part to the work of Matt and others at DHS and the standing up of elections as a critical infrastructure subsector there has been a tremendous amount of progress, not only in the last 4 years, but really markedly in the last 2 years, on cybersecurity especially. And at the same time, what we realized was when we looked at what had happened in 2016 and 2018, our nation faces a combined threat. And the nature of that combined threat is cybersecurity is a big problem for us. Misinformation is equally a problem for this country. In addition to that, the concept of the perceptions of integrity around the election is a threat area. And finally, within the past 6 months, all of us have seen this other part of the threat take shape that really in the past 100 years, we thought we had a handle on physical threats to the election. And a new physical threat has emerged. So we have a very messy, converged, combined threat space where we have historically been very strong on the physical safety and security of elections. And we have become increasingly strong on the cybersecurity related to elections infrastructure and operating elections with high-tech equipment. So where then are there areas where we could potentially contribute? And the first of those is Squint. So many of you, David Stafford and others, already have been using Squint and are aware of Squint for election integrity. And the gist is we created a digital version of the See Something, Say Something program. Freely available for all states, widely deployed in more than 12 states now. We accept new states all the time. The goal here is to crowdsource misinformation about elections and to make sure that we are properly analyzing and getting back to state and local officials, to secretaries of state, what is going on in your state affecting your voters, so that you then have the ability to make the right decisions, informed decisions about how to counter those problems. So that's the first action we took, is to build a template, a prototype that's out there in the world, helping hopefully with this 2020 election, rapidly expanding as we head during these last 45 days. The next thing that we have been tackling is that this renewed physical threat of sanitation challenges and concerns about COVID really does present a fresh opportunity to revisit how do we keep people safe and ensure that they want to vote in whatever way is appropriate to them. So last week, we published 6 Steps to a Safe, Trusted Election, which you can Google. It has all kinds of materials about the innovative practices that states are bringing to bear this year to make sure that their voters feel safe and that they are empowered to vote. Lastly, what I want to share with you today is that we observed that there are so many great resources emerging for state and local election officials. CISA and the EAC, as well as nonprofits, non-governmental organizations, academia. These resources, these top quality resources, are proliferating rapidly. And what we have observed is that if you're a state or local election official, you have very little time and you really need to be able to find resources quickly. And so today at 4 p.m., I invite you all to visit electionintegrity.mitre.org. We are launching today an aggregated one-stop shop for election resources that come from these excellent contributors to the ecosystem from all across America. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you so much for your comments, and we'll certainly, I think we would encourage everyone to watch for that launch at 4 p.m. As we move from opening thoughts to the Q&A, I think you can see why these 4 individuals are so immersed in this election security issue with their expertise and background. As Matt is certainly sure to understand, at CISA, the department sees itself as an operating department, folks on the front lines. So my first question to Secretary Boockvar and Supervisor Stafford would be, what are you looking for over the next 40 plus days in terms of being on the ground, watching for issues to emerge, since you're really on the front lines as those operators?
I think we're looking for everything. We're watching everything. I think the communications with the counties, with our partners on every front. I mentioned later that we have a call. I have a meeting later with PEMA and law enforcement, National Guard, and others to also make sure that we're preparing for things that we don't always think about, but which came or I should say, we don't think about as much as this year, where we had direct experience with, for example, civil unrest that rocked our country, and including multiple communities in Pennsylvania right before our primary. So we want to make sure that we think very strongly and prepare for keeping tensions low, right? We don't know what's going to happen on that. I always hope to be over prepared and have a surprisingly calm election. But I want to make sure, for example, that conversations are happening between local law enforcement and local elections offices, local emergency management agencies, which those relationships have been building over the last couple of years, thanks to things like tabletop exercises. I think I was surprised several years ago when we first started those. And again, I want to give credit to CISA and lots of agencies across the nation for really encouraging those and building those exercises, because even something as simple as county election officials knowing who to call in their community is huge. So we're taking that a step further. We're making sure that everybody's having those conversations ahead of time on things like on the ground security, to make sure that people understand that the goal is to lower tensions, should such tensions rise on election day. And that's just one example. So interested to hear what others are thinking about in the next 40 days.
Supervisor Stafford?
Well, at this time, we're in the execution phase, right? So we plan for literally years to conduct elections, and the presidential general election is the biggie. Not that all elections are not important, but this is in a different category. So at this time, literally we're in the thing you have to remember is while we're having to balance and be cognizant of the security issues, we also have to make sure we actually are able to functionally carry out all of the necessary moving parts that is conducting an election. And so you kind of have to go on parallel tracks here. So we're executing these plans that have been put in place for, literally months and even years prior. So, and it's a lot of it is about contingency planning. So the what if scenarios, that's why these TTXs and the sort of everybody sitting around a table. Okay, what are we going to do if this happens and that happens? And then just be using the tools and the resources that have been brought to bear since some of these initiatives, some of the money, and that's something I did not mentioned previously. I know Dr. Hale touched on it. These resources are important, both the election security, the several tranches of election security funds that were provided by the federal government, as well as the CARES Act money. Those have been critical in helping us on the local level prepare to meet these challenges. And so, you're basically putting your processes in place, and then monitoring, and then standing by with your contingency plans in the what if scenarios. What happens if you do get, if this happens, being able to execute those contingency plans. And so right now, we're the inside 45 days is really, mailing out ballots and making sure you're like for us, and then to make matters even more complex here, we just had a direct hit from a Category 2, borderline Category 3 hurricane. So you lay that on top of everything, and so now we're in the midst of trying to go out and assess how many of our polling places are going to be affected. Fortunately, it looks like it's going to be a relatively low number, but that's just something else that we have to contend with here, just in our little neck of the woods. So there's a lot of moving parts, and it's now in the execution phase, and relying on your people and your contingency plans, and knowing who to reach out to if you need help.
Oh, that's really helpful. Dr. Hale, Ms. Frye, you're talking to a lot of election officials around the country. What are you hearing about COVID-19 as it relates to election security?
Well, I think following up on David's comments about the complexity of the system, one of the things that comes through for me constantly is the resilience of election officials in dealing with any sort of unexpected events. The COOPs, the continuity of operations plans, are not new to particularly local election officials on the ground. The pandemic is a challenge. It's definitely a challenge, but it's a challenge that's being met by election officials who are well prepared and well versed in dealing with all manner of natural disasters. Wildfires, 9/11 occurred on Election Day. The hurricanes in the Gulf, and other sorts of weather events around the country. This is a group of people who plan ahead. They plan carefully, they plan well, and are, at this point, as David mentioned, all about executing the plans, the very good plans that they've already put in place.
Great.
Just a couple of thoughts to add. Just a couple of things to add to that. For the most part, I am, as I usually am with election officials, just in awe. Their dedication, their creativity, their innovative powers, they do what needs to be done to make sure the election works, and it works well. The one area where I'm still sensing and hearing some outstanding concerns is dislocated populations. So because of the fires and other natural disasters at the moment, we do have some people out and about and across the country who they're not quite sure how they're going to be voting. They don't have that plan in place that we were talking about earlier because their plans have been disrupted. The other thing I want to foot stomp is there's such a variety of mechanisms and options right now that states are using. The combination of early in-person voting, which people are going to, even though they have to wait in lines. In some cases, they want to feel that part of that tradition where you vote in person. That remains a strong factor of our national character and our values. So there's a lot of people choosing that option. This idea of dropping your ballot in a safe, known ballot box space is also apparently gaining a lot of traction. And how do you sanitize things in a regular polling location and distance the equipment? They are thinking through that very creatively and effectively as well.
Great. Now I'd like to draw Frank and Matt back into the conversation as we transition for more Q&A.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you to the panel, Kathy, David, Kathleen, and Emily. Some great insights here, and we've got a couple questions coming in. But I wanted to start with a general question. Start with you, Matt, and then I want to hear specifically from Kathy and David. But Matt, how would you explain? So information sharing, and I know we've beaten this issue pretty hard over the years from a national security perspective, from a counterterrorism perspective, from an election security perspective, but how would you evaluate how CISA is integrating data, and is it getting the information it needs from the intelligence community, whether through the Cybersecurity Directorate that was recently stood up at the National Security Agency or other OD&I elements? How would you evaluate the information that you're providing? And then to Kathy and David, do you feel, I mean, sometimes you can drown in data and it's finding the signal from the noise that can be the issue, but how do you feel that intelligence process is working in terms of the information you're getting from CISA, and it's a two-way street. information that arguably can be fed into that system. So Matt, let me start with you. How does that look right now? Are you confident where it stands? Are you confident that the tasking prioritization is in place? And then I want to hear from our customers at the state and local level as well. So Matt, you want to tee it up?
Yeah, I really appreciate this question. It's an area that I think the federal government's made huge improvements on even since 2018. So, there's the work we put in 2016 into 2018. And one of the lessons or areas of focus for us was getting more timely, actionable information out more broadly. And the commitment from the IC, the commitment from our partners at the Bureau to really get more information in and share it, not just with us, but across the federal government, has really increased. The tempo at which we're getting it has increased. And the commitment from the IC has really been met, whether it's partners at ODNI, where there's an election threat executive pushing information to us, right, and helping share it, or other agencies. I think it's an area we've improved a lot, and I can tell you is a daily area of focus for us at CISA. We have a team that's entirely focused on working with the interagency, working with the private sector in order to bring that information in, process what we're getting from states and locals, tie in with the ISAC, and what they're seeing on Albert sensors to really be able to take it. With that said, I think there's areas for improvement. You've hit on actually two of them. One of them is recognizing what election speed is. Election officials don't have the benefit for taking too long. The quicker we can get it to them in their environments now, the quicker that they can respond. And so ensuring that we recognize meeting them in the tempo they're in now is really critical. And so that's a constant mantra for all of us in the federal level. And then that signal to noise ratio. One of the areas that election officials have really pushed us on is as we get into the election environment where they're getting hit by voters and campaigns and everyone else is, how are you going to flag for us the truly critical pieces of information versus, okay, this is something you guys need to know, but it's not this wink and a nod, go take care of this immediately. And so a focus for us working with the ISAC is really how do we highlight the truly critical information. And one of the conversations we had is there was an assumption, understandably, in the election community that if something was joint sealed from the federal government, right, FBI, DHS, maybe ODNI together, that must be the most important tidbit of information. But that's actually not always the case. There may be a DHS alert or an FBI spear that's really critical that's just coming from one agency. And so how are we going to really hone in and let election officials know this is something you all need to pay attention to? And one of the ways we're doing that is through these regular unclassified threat briefings, to get on the phone and say, here's activity we're seeing, here's reporting that we've got, really hone in on this mitigation or focus on this part of your systems. And so I think that's an area for improvement for us over the next 40 days to really make sure the signal to noise ratio is correct for the election officials.
Awesome. Kathy, David?
Yeah, I think I generally feel like we are getting the information that we need. I think between classified briefings and I have to give credit, and Matt, you should take this back. The regional, at least in Pennsylvania, our regional DHS folks are terrific. And so
yep.
That's huge because, you guys are doing at the national level, lots of good briefings and the election stakeholder calls and all the increase of information, regular information in general. But then those local conversations just kind of help strengthen the context and the responses and how we could be working together. And that's obviously an essential piece of it, right? It's one thing to have the information, but then what are you doing with that, right? And I feel like the local folks, the regional folks have just been terrific. And so you should pass that along, and I think, I appreciate the other partners that have, stepped up as well. And, again, we didn't have relationships with the folks in the FBI, and that's been growing. They've taken a closer role, a stronger role in this it seems like in the last year, they've really, kind of moved that forward, and that's been great as well. So I feel like we are getting the information we need, but I think, like Matt said, the warp speed that things exercise on in the 24/7 news cycle means that, I do worry about, in those last couple of days, and on election day, and, the communications on election day between your war room and all of our war rooms is also really helpful. And we've made a point of having those communications continue between Department of State and all 67 counties as well. And we've seen that on election day play out and have direct positive impact. Federal to state communications, state to local communications. So I think, we have a really strong foundation, and I just, that warp speed is critical. So thank you for all of that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you. David, any insights from your perspective on that?
I would just add that the amount of information can be overwhelming that we get, which is a far cry from where we were 4 years ago, which that can create a problem in and of itself, because, as you know, if you get too much information, you're trying to sift through what's really important and what is not. I think that has gotten better, and it's sort of that subtle, let me grab you by the collar and say, hey, this is something you really need to pay attention to. And I think over the course of the last couple of years, and particularly this year, I've seen it. It seems that we're getting in a better sort of tempo of communicating that without setting everyone's hair on fire, but saying, hey, look, this is really something, out of the 50 alerts that you just got, this is the one that you really need to pay some special attention to. The other thing is recognizing that, and I don't know that this has been talked about too much today, is that the tremendous diversity in a local election office. Right. So we've got Miami-Dade County with 1.3 million voters. And then we've got Liberty and Lafayette County that have 4,000 or 5,000 registered voters. And so you have to have a system that works for both. Right. So, Miami-Dade has got a tremendous resources and talent there available to do something with this information. Whereas, when you're in an office of 1 or 2 people or 3 people, maybe, you're not going to have an election. You're not going to have a cybersecurity expert, sitting in a chair right there to be able to do something with this information. So recognizing from a leadership standpoint, if you're the person sitting in my chair, what do I need to do with that information? Is this something I need someone to act on? Because a lot of times it's people outside your organization. It may be somebody on the broader county that's also, helping out the sheriff's office and the tax collector and the board of county commissioners and the folks that are, paving roads. That, hey, okay, I need some time here too, because this is really critical. So information sharing has gotten better. I think the ability to sort of prioritize continues to be a challenge, but that they're coming a long way, I think.
Awesome. Thank you. And I want to thank you all for underscoring. I mean, Kathy, you mentioned the regional input. And I mean, for those of us in the cyber business, obviously technology matters. But at the end of the day, human nature matters even more. And behind the clickety clacks of the keyboard, good or bad, are people. So I think that reinforcing and reaffirming the importance of the individuals who build trust. It can evaporate like that. It takes years to build, but that is literally rule number one and priority number one.
Hey,
I've got
Frank,
2 questions
Frank,
that I think we can open. Please, Matt.
I'm sorry, just real quick, just on that, I don't want to hammer it too much, but the regional staff, for those that don't know, we have hundreds of protective security advisors, cybersecurity advisors, and regional staff in all 50 states. And I cannot overstate their importance to the work we've done in elections. They're the boots on the ground that have built the relationships with the states, with the counties. And the key is they live and work in those states. It's not some chucklehead in DC like me, trying to talk to states, but instead it's people that understand the needs of those states, that understand the challenges that these folks are facing. And it has meant everything to us. So Secretary, thank you. Frank, thank you for highlighting the good work of our regional staff, because they have meant everything to us in this work.
Awesome. And thank you to Congress for getting that funded this past year. So that was not an easy lift, but I'm glad that the right thing happened at the end of the day. I've got two questions I want to open up to the entire panel because we've only got 6 minutes, so maybe 7. We can spill over a few. But the first question is coming from Brian DeValence, who I think many of you know. He's a senior fellow of ours, but he's also been integral at CIS in terms of standing up the Elections ISAC, or Information Sharing and Analysis Center. And his question was geared toward social media companies and how can we genuinely get to where we need if we, and maybe we do, but if we don't have the interaction we need with some of the primary social media companies. That's number one. And we also got a question from Mark Sachs, who is also a senior fellow, but also was the first head of the Electricity Information Sharing and Analysis Center out of NERC and VP at Verizon. And his question was a very technology oriented question. Where does the blockchain fit into all of this? And Kathy, I remember we hosted you in the past with the president of Estonia, where they were talking to some extent about the blockchain, not as an end-all be-all, but as a potential enabler in all of this. So 2 questions. I'm not going to call on anyone unless you want to jump in. Just jump in, and it's regarding 1, social media. Where do we stand? How can we improve that? And number 2, blockchain. Where does that fit in? Thoughts? Don't be shy, guys, or I will call on you like a professor.
I'll just super quick say, I think the blockchain's not quite there yet, so I'm not going to comment on that. For social media, I want to go back to, I think, Matt Masterson, it was you who started earlier in your initial comments, talked about misinformation and disinformation and trusted info 2020. And I will tell you also that I did bring up the war on pineapple last week in a forum as well. So for the, it was, it's sort of a goofy thing. Obviously, pineapple doesn't belong on pizza, so it's really not a question. But but it was a great
With the
example.
vowel at the end of my name, I agree.
Excellent. But so I won't talk long on this, but I think the social media problem is a huge, huge problem, and I don't have any answers. But I think, the more, every single interview conversation I have, when I keep getting asked what are the things that keep me up at night, and Director Krebs is not calling me in the middle of the night, so I'm thankful for that. But it's the disinformation and the misinformation. And I keep telling people, don't click retweet, don't click retweet, don't click retweet. It's so easy to perpetuate. And of course, that's what our foreign adversaries, that's what our domestic adversaries, that's what they want us to do to undermine confidence in an election. So we need to train people. Trusted Info 2020, Trusted Info 2020. Go to votespa.com. Go to the DHS and to FVAP and all the trusted sources of information, and don't perpetuate the false stuff that is all over. And the more we're just saying that over and over again, I don't know, hopefully one of you has some brilliant answer to this. I would just as soon get rid of most of the social media companies, so I didn't just say that out loud.
Thoughts from anyone else on that? They have taken steps. Please go, Emily.
I'd like to share a couple of thoughts. One is we all know now their goal, if we speak about the adversary in social media, is to distract and divide the United States population, the voting population, or any other way you define us as a people. And if you do that, then you make sure that America isn't pulling together. And that is extremely destructive to all aspects of constitutional democracy, including the perceived integrity of our election processes. So one of the things I want to share, this is just a tidbit from what we're seeing in our analytics, is that a considerable portion, between 30 and 50% of the content that we're seeing that is misinformation is actually refurbished the same content that was used 2018 and sometimes 2016. It's the exact same content, and it's being re-injected into the social media ecosystem and causing just as much uproar now, because to us today, everyone has forgotten what happened 2 years ago. It's once again fresh, and yet it is once again unhelpful to us as a country. The next thing I would like to say is about the system itself. What we have seen in the past year, and we have to applaud this, is that many of the dominant platforms have decided to step up and be much more proactive in what they are doing about misinformation and disinformation on their platforms. And I do applaud that. But at the same time, what they are doing here is unilateral. And unilateral platform by platform activity is only one part of what we need in order to understand and combat systemic problems across the social media ecosystem. So I would advocate, obviously it won't happen by this election, but I advocate that between now and the next presidential election, let's move that ecosystem into some standards for disclosure and transparency, some standards for how proactively they inform state and local election officials what is impacting their voters, and those kinds of multilateral system-wide changes.
So,
Thank you,
Frank,
Emily.
just
Very
real
well
quick,
said. Please.
I know we're at time, but just to share my experience, we meet regularly with all the major social media platforms and have spent a great deal of time in partnership with them, working to understand areas of risk, areas that could be used to undermine trust in the process from, before the election, on election day, and afterwards. And I can tell you, our experience is the amount of information they're sharing, the amount of work being done, federal government to platforms has increased a lot. Their partnership has meant a lot. They're going to be participating with us in the Operations Center leading up to and on election day so that we can sort fact from fiction. And so, the other part of this is pre-bunking, pre-messaging, empowering election officials and amplifying their voices about how the process works, what your options are, and what information's there. If we can hit that over and over and over again, the American people respond when they receive a message on a constant basis from trusted sources, right? From those trusted sources. And so we need to be raising up election officials' voices, those who have the information available. There is more information from election officials available for voters now than ever before. And we just got to get them to take the election officials up on that information and use it and pre-bunk it. Give that information to the voters to work off of.
Matt, the tyranny of time requires I be a bit of a tyrant. Anyone have a last minute thought here? I might note, I have an old World War II poster in the back there, all out for defense of democracy, informed opinion counts. So I think it's, this is where things change, they tend to stay the same in some ways as well. But I think the ability to light a fire and have it spread has grown exponentially. Without further ado, I wish we could go on. This has been an amazing discussion, but most importantly, thank you for the dedication. Thank you for all you guys are doing every day. I don't think there's anything more important than voter confidence and the integrity of our election system. Thanks to you for making that happen. And I want to tie it back to Governor Ivey's opening words: vote. And thank you for making that possible. So without further ado, unfortunately, this is a wrap. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.